Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse Podcast live stream A and Q segment. We are ready to rock and roll.
Apparently we're not interesting enough for Fairfax to stick around.
You know, cats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't live without them.
Nope.
All right. We are going to start, as we always do, with a question from the Discord server. This week they had a tie. So they proposed two questions to us, but one of them I see is actually closely matched with the question that came in on DarkHorse submission. So I'm going to go with the one that's not a match. And then we have one from another friend who made a special request. And then we'll get into the questions from DarkHorse submissions. We got a cat fight going on in the background there. Okay, first question. Can you elaborate?
Yes, at length. I can also extrapolate. And sometimes I like to mix and match the two.
Do you?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Extrapolate.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Elaborate.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh boy. Okay. Can you elaborate on what's wrong with the food pyramid? And do you know of a source that clearly lays out the history of corruption and errors in nutrition guidelines? It seems like they've improved a lot in recent years, but are still pretty poor. Let's just start with the easy part, which is the I don't know part. I don't know of a source that lays out the history of corruption and errors, but I'd be very interested in that. I would hope that there's some absolutely fantastic book out there. And so if there is, if you guys figure it out, tell us. I'd be very interested in knowing that. With regard to, it seems like they've improved a lot in recent years, but are still pretty poor. I'm not going to remember where it was, but I just saw a new set of recommendations put out by, this university, that university, the head of the something, FDA, I don't remember, that ended up, this got a lot of like social media plays, maybe a couple weeks ago, ended up, if you followed what they actually said, clearly, you were better off basically eating like Cheetos and wheat bran than you were eating steak and eggs, which is bullshit, right? So the problem now, for sure, is a combination of a history of wrong upon wrong upon error upon wrong, and so it's hard for almost anyone who's in the system to imagine that actually what we have to do is scrap the entire thing and rethink it all. But also you just have the perverse incentives, again, with regard to, who's paying the bills. And so, what is it, like General Mills, there's a few giant food producers who make most of their money with the value-added products. So it's not that they're making most of their money by selling wheat. They're making most of their money by selling, Frosted Flakes or something. And if they're helping fund a bunch of the research that's being done, well, the research isn't going to really be good research, probably. So, and none of that got to the first part of the question, but we'll riff a little bit here.
Well, I'm just stumped by it because it's a classic case of what could possibly go right, right? You have a governmental body that is going to make recommendations based on health that are going to affect how much of various competing products are purchased, and no protection that would keep corruption from using that to adjust what happens. And so all I would say is, look, among the many ways that governmental power is going to be abused are anything that looks like a mandate is going to be very tempting to anything that would like its product forced onto people. Mm-hmm. And anything that looks like standard of care is going to be irresistible. And in this case, you have something that is somewhere in between, right? To the extent you've got a food pyramid, it's going to affect school lunches, it's going to affect advice. And so the point is, you're an ape with a history, an evolutionary history. That evolutionary history has been disrupted by modernity. What you want to do is correct for the distortions of modernity, but you can't possibly expect a system in which literally tens of billions of dollars are at stake based on the recommendation given by a fallible, corruptible body. It's going to be abused in exactly the way that we know it to have been abused. Right? It's going to recommend things that aren't good for you in order that you will override your own personal trepidations about them. And so I guess the point is people frequently ask us for, oh, well, how could we fix the system? Geez, how can we fix higher ed? Well, you could burn the system that you have to the ground, and then you could think about how not to repeat those errors. But I think the point is reform of systems that are this badly captured is not going to happen. A, they have an immune system that will fend off your attempts at reform. And B, you haven't figured out how to solve the fundamental problem of banishing corruption. And so I think the point is the food pyramid is dead on arrival. You're really going to take advice? Here's my feeling, okay? Job number one, I will not accept any food recommendations from somebody who does not give me a clear statement on the number of sexes there are and how you can help, okay? Point is, look, you are asking something that has told you that it is scientifically incapable to give you recommendations on what to eat. Okay? That's what you're doing. It's also going to give you recommendations on what to allow yourself to be injected with and how that compares to your actual immune system and its ability to fend off viruses. And the point is, no, it keeps telling you in 100 different ways that it isn't interested in science, that it isn't capable of doing good science, that it is simply interested in doing the bidding of interests that you don't know and can't see. And so, I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, food pyramid's dead on arrival, and I'm ashamed that I didn't spot that as a child, because it should have been obvious back then that this was going to be a corrupted mechanism, and anybody who's missed it at this point is just not paying attention.
Okay, well, that's all very well and good, but it doesn't actually address the question of what's wrong with it. You answer the question of like what's wrong with the formulation of having one, but as per what's in it. So I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about that. So I looked it up, and as much as HuffPo has obviously become a ridiculous thing in recent years, the first thing that I found while you were talking that looks halfway reasonable is a 2016 article. Again, our ability to display my screen isn't working, so they have, it doesn't matter. They have a bunch of these from around the world, and they have China's food pagoda, they call it. Maybe they actually call it that in China. I don't know. This feels like a HuffPo thing. And they have one from the UK, France, I'm guessing. Yeah, France is going to be a little bit different. They do a better job than most of these, but almost all of them. So this is the perfect example right here. Hungary's House Food Guide, and the U.S. looks similarly ridiculous. Has cereals at the bottom, vegetables and fruits, meats and milk sharing like a weird little rooftop space, and then sugar and fat as the chimney. So the idea is that you should have the most of the stuff on the bottom and less as you go up. And I think the reason that cereals shows up, which it's going to be a different cereal depending on what part of the world you're in. If you're in Asia, it's most likely to be rice. If you're in the UK, it might be potatoes. And it's going to be sorghum in some places, quinoa in some places, whatever. It's going to be some seed of a monocot, of a grass usually, that has been through intensive agricultural practice over thousands of years, made into a crop that can easily be harvested and then turned into something that has a little bit of staying power in terms of beer or bread. You can carry it around. That was an incredible innovation for humans, to be able to farm and then to be able to make, to turn these once widely dispersed, what we now call cereal crops, into a thing that we could reliably know where to go. And they are full of energy. But they are not the best thing for us. And at least in America, I imagine, maybe I'm wrong, that most of our viewers and listeners are plenty well fed. And if anything, if you've got an issue, it's more likely to be you have access to more food than you need. And it's a question of keeping yourself from from going there, as opposed to not having enough calories. In a world without enough calories, cereals can be a godsend. But in a world where there's plenty of calories, putting cereals at the bottom, at the foundation of a food pyramid, doesn't make sense. Meat, milk, if you can accommodate it, if you're from a lineage and are an individual who can accommodate it, dairy products are great as well. But meat and some fruit, some vegetables, and some fat should be the things that you are building your diet on. And I just picked on Hungary here, but they've got sugar and fat together, linked together there as the top of the chimney of the house of the food pyramid. That's ridiculous. Sugar and fat are like the opposites in terms of what they can do for you in your diet and whether or not you should be eating them.
So I don't get it, though. It still seems to me like, what is the geometrical solution to food? It doesn't have a geometrical solution, right? Oh, but can you critique? Maybe it's an octagon and it shouldn't be a pyramid. Yeah, maybe, or maybe it's not a geometrical problem. So I still think the basic point is to critique this particular method is, like trying to, describe how to properly divide your time based on the ratio of different types of roads to drive on. And,
I mean, surely you can understand the question to be a broader one of like, okay, I've heard a lot about it not being good, but then what should we be eating?
Right. But what should we be eating? I would rather say, look, read Michael Pollan. There's actually advice in there that can be operationalized and doesn't try to dumb things down to a geometrical structure that is easy to color code. But the point is, you'll actually learn something about food and you'll learn something about your ancestors. And I guess for me at this point, I am so done with the simplified formulations designed to trick me into doing something that 15 years from now I will understand was not in my interest, right? I'm just done with it. And so I guess my point is, if a nutritionist is pointing a pyramid at you, that nutritionist is into pyramid power, and the answer is no, thank you. I'm not interested in your mystical view of food. I'd rather go with some common sense, and and I can get it from somebody who's willing to speak to me in plain English rather than pretend that I need it color coded.
Right. So I was going to let you have the last word there, but like you invoke common sense, and I think part of what this question is asking, and what a lot of people are asking, is like, okay, but I've been so befuddled. I've been so lied to. I know I've been lied to. I know I've been getting really bad advice for a long time, such that I don't know what common sense sounds like. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. I would like to re-educate myself, reinform myself, my gut, my palate, all of it sufficiently that I can then be driven by what my body is telling me to pursue. But until and unless I can get over some hump that's between me and there, it's not going to be that easy. Okay, so I think you're being a little harsh.
No, I'm really not being harsh enough. No, honestly, I mean, I am at my wits' end.
I'm
with
not
this.
I'm not saying you're being harsh on the food pyramid. I'm saying you're being harsh on the audience, on the people who are struggling with this.
I'm trying to tell them like it is, right? You could imagine.
We used to eat a lot more grains than we do now.
Yep. You could imagine.
Recently.
You could imagine somebody who was, open to the possibility of the pandemic having been mismanaged, but not really over in DarkHorse space, right? You could imagine them saying, okay, but let's just look at the CDC's advice. How can we make it better? And the answer is
no. This person did not ask, how can we make it better?
Well,
no. See, that's
what's wrong with it?
You are responding to a question that didn't get asked. The question is, what's wrong with it?
Right.
That's a different question than how can we make it better?
What's wrong with it is it. It's the whole thing.
The question: what should it be? What's good advice?
It shouldn't be a pyramid. It should be replaced with a free copy of Michael Pollan's book, The Omnivore's Dilemma, sent to every citizen.
Okay, Omnivore's Dilemma is fantastic. I taught with it when it came out, but it doesn't. And the book that comes out after that is a little bit closer to what you're talking about. The Omnivore's Dilemma doesn't do this at all. he talks about what real food looks like, but he does so by like going boar hunting in Contra Costa County in California, right? And by visiting whatever the awesome dude's name is who does like the chicken tractor in on the East Coast. And, you know, he experiences some, you know, he goes and looks at real, honest food production and some, you know, massive monopolistic, you know, monocropping food production as well. But it's not a manual.
Right. But there isn't a manual.
There might be.
This is what I'm trying to say is there is a reform mindset about taking things that aren't good and making them better. And we are so far past the utility of this mindset that I
just think you're misreading the question. I think you're responding to something that didn't get asked.
Maybe, but I think I am responding with the answer, the fast forward answer.
But if the question isn't how can we fix it, the question is, okay, I get it, it's broken. So what's not broken?
Okay, what's not broken is the idea that you are a creature with evolutionary metabolic expectations living outside of your ancestral environment. Okay. You could take something, you know, useful advice from Michael Pollan. Stay out of the middle of your supermarket, right? That's an operationalizable piece of advice it's not geometric.
And he's got another one,
right?
So he writes the book, I think it's like 2008. So just corrected for time-ish. And how old you might have been when you were reading it. If your grandmother wouldn't have recognized it as food, it's not food.
Right.
That's another one that he gives. Right.
Right. Yep. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Okay. Also operationalizable.
Yeah, and I don't agree with that one at this point.
Well, you may not, but the point is, it is already, even if it's not perfect. How do we fix Michael Pollan's advice? Would be better. That's a real question. How do we fix advice that wasn't...
So you're stuck on how do we fix. You're railing against the how do we fix mentality, and you keep returning to it. And I mean, I gave something of an answer already, but like I think the person asking the question, I think most of us are interested in figuring out, okay, forget the broken system then. Let's talk about what we should be doing.
Right. I mean, and, you know, of course, we do this in our book. We talk a lot about this stuff, and it's also...
We do. And I somehow forgotten that. Yeah, we do an entire chapter on food and diet. And one of the things we start in that chapter is, you know, look at all the sort of fad diets out there right now. You know, there's the grapefruit diet. There's the paleo diet. There's this, that, and the other. There's a Mediterranean diet. Some of these diets are stupid. Like grapefruit diet is not going to be good for you long term. I mean, I'm sure you can survive for a week unless you're already anorexic, but like, you know, just don't. But you know, to some degree, within reason, you know, if it is borrowing from a tradition that exists in the world. If the Mediterranean diet, whatever exactly that specifies, really does match how some people who live in Greece, say, eat, then that's going to be healthy for some people in the world. Is it guaranteed to be healthy for you? No. Because you may not have enough Greek in you to match whatever exactly that's doing. So, you know, by and large, especially in America, we're mutts. And so we got a lot of different things going on in terms of what we probably can get away with eating. But obviously the diet of the Maasai and the diet of the Inuit are very, very different. And you can't just tell an Inuit, like, oh, just eat the Mediterranean diet. It'll be great for you. It's like there's a decent chance that's not going to work out as well. Yeah.
I think I am, you know, you are detecting the end of my patience with bad people who oversimplify things, because part of the thing about a rubric that is saleable is that it's simple enough to remember. And so they're using that to bypass reason. And frankly, you need to eat real food. You need to avoid using huge volumes of stuff that are being used to fill you up, right? And probably most important on the list, if you get down to something that looks like a diet that somebody has eaten in, you know, 500 years ago looked like a diet. If you get to that thing, the biggest remaining issue is, how was your food produced? right?
Yeah.
Is it full of pesticide residues that the FDA is going to swear are not a hazard to your health, but is going to give you Parkinson's? And 20 years from now, we will be having that discussion about how you got Parkinson's and how it wasn't really about the content of what you were eating, but it was about the residual stuff that got mixed in there that didn't change the nutritional aspect of it one bit, right? So
Absolutely.
there's that. There's the selecting of particular strains for reasons that are not health or
Transport.
Yeah.
Transport of mangoes.
Transport, stability, all these things, right? So industrial agriculture is bad for you for all kinds of reasons. And the food pyramidization of the question is part of the problem, right? It's simply a dead on arrival mechanism for looking.
I guess maybe I'm not. I don't remember really ever running into the food pyramid as a kid, so it didn't loom large for me ever. So for me, they exist as sort of separate. Like the food pyramid seems to me like a stupid, wrong-headed dead end, as opposed to sort of central to this whole to all of this. And maybe it is. Maybe clearly it's being used as a tool by a lot of people. So I don't know if Zach has wanted to say something for a little bit. Are you mic'd?
I can be.
Yeah. Is that okay?
I think more core than the food pyramid, which is just sort of some random visual that like I've sort of barely seen it, but I think some people may be well familiar with it. The idea of a balanced diet is the most core problem. That there's nothing inherently I think the way I think about it is that we've been given a gift effectively of being omnivores. We can eat anything, right? I mean, you can't really eat trees, but you can eat kale, but it's hard to get a lot out of it, right? And if you eat only salads every day, you can live and you'll be sort of healthy, but that's not, that stuff isn't very easy to get much energy out of. And if you stop pretending that everything is equally good for you in the right proportions and think about the way that you feel after you eat a steak and a salad and a bowl of fruit and each of those,
Yeah.
the way you feel after a day after each of those and an hour after each of those, you will stop weighting each type of food as equally beneficial, because most people have so much access to really, really good food for them and also so much access to really terrible food for them and everything in between, that the idea that everything is equally good for you and you should have a plate with 10% of each of those 10 things, destroying everyone.
Yeah.
But this is
good.
This is effectively what I'm saying, is that it is misphrasing the problem and pretending to simplify when in fact it's not a simplification. It's just wrong. And I think maybe that's what's getting me, is when somebody presents something like a food pyramid or a food pagoda or a food whatever the Hungry House thing was, right? What they are doing...
We have Japan's spinning top.
The spinning top. What they are doing is they are...
Germany went 3D. Sorry.
They are pretending that this is the following kind of problem. There's a tremendous amount of nutritional information, and I'm not going to burden you with it. It's a diminishing returns problem. So here's the thing. If you've got only a minute and a half, here's the pyramid. And the point is, no, what you just told me was that you were going to give me the broadest brushstrokes, and I was going to get the biggest bang for the buck for what you're telling me. And if I want to get more detailed and pursue smaller and smaller profits, I can get more and more nuanced and closer to the literature. But the diagram you just gave me is wrong. You told me you were simplifying it and that I was going to leave some profit on the table, but I was going to get a lot of bang for the buck because it was only going to take me a minute to understand. Then you told me something dead wrong. And so it's the thing that tells you something dead wrong while pretending that it is a simplification that has got to go.
I feel like we've seen that pattern sometimes in the last 3 years.
This is kind of my point, is it's that same thing is doing it to us.
Yep. Fair enough.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes.
Just continuing on what I just said, I would suggest never feeling bad about having a meal that is like one thing. Like if you have a steak or a bowl of eggs or something, that is a full meal, even if you don't have your 5% of sugar and your whatever else, and you have a little bit of carbs with it or whatever, and that can be good. You can have a meal with some mixed stuff, but if you have a full meal that's just a bunch of beef or something, that's one example that I'm particularly fond of. But if
Yeah.
you have something that is just a core thing as your meal, that's not a problem if it's good for you.
I agree, and it may actually limit the amount that you eat because if you,
I
because
must
if you eat
say,
a bunch of
if
things.
no. I have the well, this is maybe just me. I think most Americans don't share this, but I end up not eating enough. I end up eating like a meal a day if I don't force myself to eat more. If I eat steaks, I will easily go through like 4 steaks a day, and I feel better and I grow. And
Well, but that's probably the result of a different phenomenon, which is that you probably, because it is one thing, and it's not just one thing at a meal, it's one thing at many meals, you are probably deficient in things that are there in trace amounts, and therefore, in order to get up to a non-deficient amount, you're probably...
I don't know about that. I feel healthier in every way when I do.
Right, but you are also eating all of those steaks, so the point is something in you is compensating. But I was going to validate your earlier point. If you think about
For
a
those who
hunter...
don't know what Zach looks like, which is almost everyone, he is fit and lean and strong.
I would not say he looks like almost everyone. But
Did I say he looks like? What did I say?
No, you said that almost everyone doesn't know what I look like.
But what I was going to say is if you think about a hunter-gatherer in a hunter-gatherer world, that individual happens on, a thing at a time. And it's not like they put together a balanced meal. It's like,
We need some Chernook with our giraffe. Go get some Chernook.
Right. You want 10% Chernook. But, you happen onto a bush full of berries and you eat berries, or you happen onto nuts that you can eat and you eat nuts, or you happen to have made a kill and you eat meat.
But this is my point. We have the gift of being able to digest all of those things. We also have the gift right now in modern society of having access to like the perfect foods, in addition to all of the worst foods you could possibly come up with. But we have access to like the things that our ancestors would dream of being able to have for every meal. If I could have a steak every meal,
Yeah.
or eggs, like fresh eggs, or
Yeah.
raw dairy, or like just like all of this stuff all of the time, it's like they would never consider eating like scrounging for leaves and such, because it's just, you can survive off of it, but it's just
Unless
not easy to get
there's a
into.
question of trace nutrients, right? There's a question of whether or not
But-
steak and eggs can actually
Well, but this is part of
get
why.
you absolutely everything that you
Well,
need.
this is part of why we don't like eating carnivores. Omnivores get, or herbivores get a lot of that. A cow gets a lot of what's in grass, and only mostly what's in grass. So they don't eat a lot of other stuff. But you get that through animals, and if you're eating a cheetah, you get a lot less of that because it's twice digested.
So don't eat cheetahs.
I mean, among other reasons.
Yes. Okay.
Well, I'm tempted to push back on your disagreeing with my agreement of you earlier, but I think in the interest of time, we should actually just move on to the next question.
I think probably so, yes. So this, I'm just going to read it. This actually comes from a friend, so we're doing something we don't really do, inserting between the Discord question and the questions from the Q&A. This is from someone who is Ukrainian. In Ukraine, Russian private military contractors are using convicts, often ones that would never pass a proper army medical. For example, a number of HIV, AIDS, and Hep C infected convicts have been denied as POWs by Ukrainian forces, and the number of dead with these conditions is unlikely to be zero. Since Russia isn't keen on collecting their war dead, I shudder to think how many others with communicable diseases are now bodies left to decay and be picked apart by animals in the Ukrainian fields and forests. What kind of environmental impacts would potentially arise out of this? Could HIV learn to jump between, say, dogs and humans? There are some overweight stray dogs in some of the hotspots. How would this affect the soil, water quality, in the surrounding areas? Can you riff on this grim reality? A grim reality I had no idea about.
Yeah, it's pretty grim.
It's very grim.
My guess would be very little in terms of communicable diseases.
Very few things are going to learn to jump new hosts this way.
Right. So the likelihood of something
I agree.
from an infected, conscripted soldier dying on a battlefield, making it into wildlife, or even less likely into another person directly, is a pretty low chance. Now, I would want somebody who's expert in this to think about the range of conditions. There may be a condition that could jump.
Like
But
a
for most of them-
particular temperature, humidity, time since death, mode of exposure. Is that what you mean by condition?
I'm looking
Or
for a pathogen that jumps from corpses.
a particular pathogen? I
Right.
see. Yeah.
And
Okay.
in general, people often leap to the conclusion that the special way that human cadavers smell is a protection against the pathogens that they had leaping to other people. And this has been repeatedly difficult to demonstrate. I don't think it's the reason that human cadavers smell special. I think it is an evolutionary warning, but of something very different. And anyway, so my point would be, most pathogens are adapted to human life.
Stay away and do not eat are distinct. Like, it goes in the same direction, but they're different levels of intensity.
Right.
Yeah.
The pathogen that is adapted to you in life, that is adapted to jump between living humans, is not well adapted to jump from a cadaver, right?
Yep.
A flea is different, right? A flea on a dying or dead animal leaping to another living animal, that's...
ectoparasites can do this.
Right.
Yep.
But a pathogen is unlikely. Again, there are ways. Consuming a cadaver changes the paradigm. And there may be pathogens that are particularly good at this. But in general, I don't think you're liable to have an environmental impact from this, nor would I expect communicable diseases to change their density. On the other hand, if you have infected people sent to war across a border, you have all kinds of other things that could happen.
Yeah.
They could end up transmitting those diseases in the normal ways that people end up transmitting diseases.
Right.
Rape happens during war, right? Could a hepatitis infected soldier who's been conscripted by the Russians?
No, I mean, it's a kind of like simultaneously biological and chemical warfare.
Right. And so anyway, it's not that there's no issue here, but I don't think the issue is necessarily from the dead. And I'd be very curious if there was a particular pathogen that violated the rule. I'd like to know what it is.
Or might evolve in that direction under circumstances.
Well, it's a pretty small opportunity.
Yeah, it is.
It's not a huge number of cadavers, and so it's even the technical possibility of such a thing evolving. It's not a very well constructed gain of function experiment.
Yep.
So I don't really expect it.
Surely not what Russia was up to. Making a good gain of function experiment there. All right. Would a wife who wants to keep her man happy by having frequent sex with him be working against her interests, pushing him towards addiction to the love him and leave him strategy? Wait. Sorry, like what? I'll read it again.
Yes.
Would a wife who wants to keep her man happy by having frequent sex with him be working against her interests, pushing him towards addiction to the love him and leave him strategy?
I get it.
No.
Answer, but
No, I mean, I guess it seems like there's built into the question an assumption that she doesn't want to be having sex, and that anytime a man is having a lot of sex, it's necessarily not with a longtime partner. I think those are two assumptions built into the question, which aren't valid inherently.
Yeah, I see it the same way. And what's more, there's just something intuitively wrong with the idea that a guy having sex at home frequently would be more incentivized to seek sex with other partners elsewhere rather than less incentivized, which just seems wrong.
Yeah, because presumably he can still tell it's the same person. I mean, even if they're like in different rooms, men are smart this way. They can tell.
Well, thank you. I think.
Okay. This is a reminder. Mentioned a while back about Dr. Ken Berry, a big fan of yours, doing an interview with you about your book and related. I think he tried to contact you recently. Hope you get to connect. Thank you for all you do. I sort of vaguely remember this. I have not seen an attempted contact. Maybe encourage that to come through again. We've recently gotten an improvement in staff that may help with this. Okay. What do you make of the hypothesis made by J.J. Couey that much of the COVID phenomenon could have been created with infectious clones and faulty PCR testing that picked up background coronaviruses?
Haven't delved deeply. I will say I intuitively, the problem is not having delved deeply. I don't want to say I don't think it's right, because really it's the kind of idea that requires careful consideration. I don't want to dismiss it based on what I think he's saying rather than what he's actually saying.
Yeah. And
However,
it's no dummy, so.
Right.
Yeah.
But however, look, the PCR thing happened. We watched them game.
Faulty PCR, just faulty PCR testing. Well, we know that it picked up background coronaviruses? We don't know that
but
part.
we know
right?
that they amplified it to the point that it wasn't actually a
You're going to
test.
allow false positives.
I mean, when I finally came to understand this problem,
The cycles.
yeah, the idea is, you've got a machine in a hospital where there's definitely COVID, and you've turned the cycle threshold up so that it's amplifying the tiniest, stray fragment. And it's like, okay.
Yeah.
I get why those two things, presumably you can't turn the cycle threshold up and get false positives if there's nothing, but in an environment where there will be a little something.
Yeah. Well, and that seems to me to be a part of this that I don't know. It picked up background coronaviruses. Now, I would have thought that the PCR would have been precise enough that a background coronavirus wouldn't have done it, but I don't know.
I don't know either. What I don't get is why. I think there is COVID. I think it's a real thing, and I think it was modified in a laboratory. And I understand, I think, the argument why JJ believes that gain-of-function research in general shouldn't be a very potent technique. I get that, but I don't think it negates what was done here, or seems to have been done here, and the viability of that thing once in the human population. As for what it is that is actually circulating, whether or not the named variants are meaningful, I remember being puzzled at the beginning of the pandemic, right? It's like, a mutation has arisen. Yeah, that probably happens like 700,000 times an hour, right? Each one of these things, right? If you really zoomed in on the phylogeny of all of these particles, right, you would have a constant modification.
Right.
And so what exactly are we talking about? How big a modification does it have to be before you spot it and name it, right? So I do think that I think there's likely to be a lot in what J.J. Couey says about swarms. Mm-hmm. It's a place I've thought he's been way ahead, and it's meaningful. But I don't, of what I've heard of where he takes this analysis, I'm skeptical.
As a nurse, I feel the game theory that hospitals follow involves the hospital with the lowest denominator of resources gets the maximum profit and wins the game. PT safety be damned. I don't know, PT. I'm going to have to read this question again. This seems to be a common theme in U.S. business, for instance, Frito-Lay. Does game theory have an answer to this, or is it always a race to the bottom?
Yeah, try it again.
Lowest denominator of research. I wonder if denominator isn't the right word here. As a nurse, I feel the game theory that hospitals follow involves the hospital with the lowest denominator of resources getting the maximum profit and winning the game. Patient, PT is going to be patient safety be damned. So I think rather than denominator, I think it's just going to mean
Costs.
Yeah. Just like the hospital that spends the least gets the most profit and wins the game, patient safety be damned.
Yep.
This seems to be a common theme in U.S. business. For instance, Frito-Lay. I don't know the Frito-Lay example. I mean, I know what Frito-Lay is, but I don't know a particular example there. Does game theory have an answer to this, or is it always a race to the bottom?
Yeah, game theory certainly has an answer. If I understand what's being suggested here, which is that you create a race to the bottom by creating a game in which those who figure out how to slash their own costs, whether that's because patients die or whether because you deny them treatment that they need, right? You come out ahead, and so the system begins to look more and more like you and your version of the game, right? The obvious way to deal with that, let's say that you had a all-cause mortality measurement across different HMOs And the point was the HMO with the lowest all-cause mortality got a financial payoff, a windfall that was large enough to beat the cost-cutting route to savings. Then
And so, but then you also have to open a protection against them not letting people in.
right. Well,
Right.
and so the point is, how many of these things do you have to stack
Right.
before what you've done?
And, or do they close down their ERs?
Well, but this
Right,
this is the question of good governance.
Yeah.
Is what is the minimal structure in which the best way to win the game is to accomplish the thing that the system is designed to actually do, like increase human health.
Right.
Right. What you want is any cheating results in you doing worse, not better.
Yeah. No, and so maybe the Frito-Lay example is like this, but I'm thinking about like appliances, right? What we as consumers want, if we have any flexibility in our spending, is to be able to spend a little bit more now and have an appliance that will definitely last for 15 years.
Yep.
As opposed to, oh, you can spend as much as you want or as little as you want, but the thing's going to fail in 4. Like, I actually, my values are that I want one that's going to last for longer.
Yep.
No, that's not on the table now.
I want one that's going to last for longer. I want one that when it fails, I can buy the part. If it's failed because one part has failed, and I can spend $200 rather than $1,000,
Yeah.
and keep it alive for another 5 years, I want to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
And so anyway, look, this is always the puzzle.
Yeah.
People are going to cheat, and the question is, can you build the set of rules in which cheating doesn't result in you coming out ahead? If you don't do that, then the point is, oh yeah, let's learn what the world of cheaters is going to look like in 10 years because they're going to own the system since nobody can compete with them.
Yep. I work on animal mRNA vaccines under an NDA. The Pfizer mRNA strands aren't uniform. It is cheaper to manufacture. Particle distribution has an adjuvant effect. You can't do that in animals.
I don't get the adjuvant claim here.
And I don't know what can't do that in animals means. I'm going to read it again. I work on animal mRNA vaccines under an NDA. The Pfizer mRNA strands are not uniform. It is cheaper to manufacture. Particle distribution has adjuvant effect. Can't do that in animals.
So hold on. I think I got it. The only thing I don't get is can't do that in animals. Of course you can. We're animals.
Right.
So
Maybe it's a moral thing, like you're not allowed to. And it goes the opposite direction.
yeah. So here's what I think is being said.
Okay.
There's certainly a thing, Chris Martenson has covered it very well, a quality control issue where basically people have done electrophoresis or the equivalent and discovered that you've got a whole bunch of different size mRNAs, which is
So it's just a molecular technique by which you can tell the size of molecules in a particular thing.
It's a quick and dirty
Yeah.
assay because what you basically do is you create an electric charge that motivates things to move, and the rate at which they move is inversely proportional to how long the sequence is, and so they separate themselves out, and you discover
I mean, the logic is kind of intuitive. Like, okay, the more mass, the slower it's going to move, the less far it will move in X amount of time.
Right. So anyway, the idea is, hey, the cartoon you showed me suggested that there was going to be an mRNA of an exact length, that it was going to contain only these messages. And it turns out that's not true. There's a lot of extra garbage on the strand that they've used because there's a lot of molecular technique into, primers and sequences and things that cause it not to be as elegant a message as you would like.
Yeah.
And then B, your quality control and production sucked. And so you've got lots of things that got halfway there and then hiccuped. And
So particle distribution, meaning strands, particle distribution has adjuvant effect, means then that all these little bits that don't do the job of that they are supposedly doing effectively just like pokes at your immune system and gets it to wake up.
what it does is it gives your immune system the sense of a lot of hostility.
Yeah.
And so
Be on alert. Yeah.
So I could see that being a sort of crude adjuvant that would then cause a lot of response in the area. So all bad. Can't do it in animals. What are you talking about? Humans being animals, if you had it to rephrase, how would you rephrase it so we would understand what it is that's actually different in presumably non-human animals?
Yep. I'm interested. Here's the question. It's related to the other question that came in from Discord this week. Any thoughts on the Ohio train derailment and the other hazardous spills that followed that event? Thank you both and much love. And so specifically the Discord question framing was, what are the evolutionary and ecological impacts of the Ohio train derailment and burn of the chemicals on the surrounding environment?
So, completely horrifying and inevitable, right? You're talking about some basic compounds involved in industrial processes in such large volumes that we are transporting these things in the open every day. And train derailments happen because trains are mechanisms and tracks are long and weather occurs and nothing's perfect.
Yep.
In this particular case, there's this very dramatic video, which you may have seen from a CCTV camera, where one of the cars on the train that derailed was sparking miles before it
Like
got...
at the wheel or the track?
Yeah, so
on the
apparently
track?
what happened,
Yeah.
you can imagine you've got a train with
Yeah.
100 cars, each of which has several axles.
Sure.
Some axle runs out of grease or a bearing breaks, and so something's rubbing that shouldn't be rubbing, and it heats up and gets
There's
red
no
hot.
one anywhere near it because it's a long
Some
freight
train passes
Yeah.
through the night,
Yeah.
and the only people manning the thing are up front.
That's what I meant. I didn't mean people outside. I meant,
Right,
like,
but
on the
apparently
train,
there-
there's only people up front, presumably.
Apparently there are detectors, right? This is a common enough problem.
Electronic detectors.
Electronic detectors that mount near the tracks that are like, oh, wait, that wheel was hot.
Oh, okay.
You've got a problem. They send a signal.
Okay.
So
Part of the train or part of the tracks?
I think it's part of the track infrastructure.
Okay.
But anyway, in this case, the whatever system it is didn't work. Thing derails.
Which will happen, like as you
Spills.
said. Yeah.
Then really weird shit happens. News blackout. We don't hear about this thing until already we're at the point of them having chosen to set it ablaze.
Yeah.
All of which is bad. The vinyl chloride, apparently, you forgive me if my chemistry's off here, but you burn this basically, this constituent of plastics, this chlorinated constituent of plastics, you burn it, and one of the common products is phosgene, which is literally a chemical warfare agent used in World War I think.
Fun.
But here's the you've got the inevitable part, you've got the industrial part where it's like, oh, you're using huge amounts of this stuff that's built out of very, very toxic constituent molecules, and you've lost control of it. Totally inevitable that will happen somewhere, right? And then you didn't have a good plan for what to do about it. Well, that wasn't inevitable, right? In fact, given that it was inevitable you were going to spill this stuff, there should have been a, team that you could have anywhere in the country within 6 hours that has the right equipment to basically limit the spread of this. I don't know what it would look like, but you would want to take all of the stuff that's recoverable and you would want to recover it into something that would then allow you to neutralize it chemically, which didn't happen, right? You've got some local fire department, scratching its head, reading up on what was on this train, what's now been spilled onto the ground, and what the dangers are. You've got what I suspect was a psyop in which all of the semi-sophisticated people were led to focus on this term BLEVE, right, which is a kind of explosion that you risk when you have a pressurized liquid and you have an accident, right? It can cause these very powerful explosions. So yes, you would, if you were on the ground, you would be worried about this possibility with these cars all topsy-turvy having derailed. But the point is, the fact that people could look that up and then start feeling sophisticated for saying it caused them to kind of miss what I suspect is the story here, which is, game theoretically, there will be repeatedly incidents where some industrial thing has happened. The right thing to do to minimize the amount of harm to human beings is X. But there's some other thing to do that minimizes the legal liability while increasing the harm to humans, right? So one thing that is true is by lighting this stuff on fire, they have distributed, I think they've probably greatly increased the number of cancers and other pathologies that people will get from the same volume of spilled liquid. But
Yeah,
they've
I think
distributed
that's
it,
part of the evolutionary and ecological answer. Yeah.
they've distributed it over a much bigger area, which means that it will be much harder to find. In other words, if you had a sky-high cancer rate in Palestine, Ohio, then the answer is, oh yeah, it was that spill.
There's no 3 Mile Island.
Right. And so
It's
So I believe
dispersed, as you say.
the question is, you always will have industry looking for a mechanism, once it has caused its own legal liability, to distribute the harms so that they are harder to spot and prove. And I believe that there are several examples of this that we've seen in recent history. One of them being the Deepwater Horizon accident, where you will recall there was a chemical that none of us had heard of until the accident called Corexit, that the oil companies had
This is long before Brexit.
They had stored this chemical. So somehow the industry had been sold this chemical that would deal in some way with a oil spill on
It just
water.
dispersed it all into little tiny droplets in the Gulf of Mexico.
It multiplied, it sank the oil. So in some ways, the disaster was less horrible than it might be because you didn't have as many pictures of greasy birds.
But it's still like the floor of the Gulf of Mexico. Like, I don't know how
Where's the
deep it
oil
is there,
go?
but like the abyssal zone or whatever is just coated in.
You can be pretty damn
oil
sure
now.
what they didn't do is figure out that the net harm was lower for using this thing. What they
Right.
found out was, hey, actually, we can sink your oil for you, and then the lawsuits you'll face will be a fraction of what you'd face otherwise. Okay, well, here we are in the public suffering whatever harms that is.
Yeah.
How's your shellfish from the Gulf of Mexico tasting, right? And then there's another case where during the Fukushima cleanup, the Japanese government played a couple of different games. One game was it had a standard for how much radioactivity meant you couldn't burn waste, right? Very reasonable standard to have. Now, this is not chemical contamination. This is radioactive particles that are not in any way rendered less radioactive by burning them. They're just dispersed.
Right.
So what the Japanese government did was it added material to waste that was too radioactive to burn in order to get it below the standard that would then allow them to burn it, which is insane. All that
And
does...
it went up, and then which way are the winds going? Did we get it on the west coast of the U.S. or did it go into Asia? Where'd
They
it go?
trucked it around Japan, as I recall.
No, but the
plume,
burn, yeah.
right. It went everywhere. I don't know whether that plume reached us. Lots of stuff from Fukushima did reach us here on the West Coast, especially the Pacific Northwest. But the trucking of the material around Japan means that the provability of the harms will go down later. This is the original. You and I talked at one point on an early live stream about monkeying with the baseline.
Yeah.
And the idea was this will drive up the baseline of cancers elsewhere, making whatever increase happens in Fukushima prefecture that much harder to see because the background elsewhere is artificially elevated. Yeah.
It's not dumb.
It's not a lack of cleverness on their part.
no.
But anyway, so what I would say is I fear that what happened in Palestine, Ohio is the result of business having gotten wise to the fact that one way to deal with its liability problem is to distribute the harms over a larger population so they're harder to prove.
Yep. The person who said they work with mRNA vaccines under an NDA says they meant not allowed to do in animals legally.
Not legally allowed to have, interesting.
In
So
non-human animals.
well, that would fit the pattern of all kinds of things that should never, ever, ever have been injected into humans, got injected into humans in this case because of the impression that we were in an emergency and it had to be done.
Yeah. A 29-year-old man from my church died from a heart attack during a game of pickup basketball this week. He left behind a young fiancée. I am angry.
Yeah. All I can say is you'd be surprised how often we get correspondence that sound something like that. And Yeah, I think it is really important. Obviously, there's some baseline level of people dying anomalously, even young, healthy people.
Yep.
But it looks pretty clear that this is not the baseline level. And our deliberate avoidance of establishing whether that is or isn't true is more evidence that it is true. You know, if this were really our minds playing
Can we
tricks
all
on us-
agree that it's in everyone's interest to figure it out?
Right. And if
Why
we're
aren't we
not-
figuring it out?
Why aren't we figuring it out? So
Why is there apparently no move to figure it out?
these people, I think I said months ago that I was concerned that it felt like life. Sometimes when you travel, you realize that life is very cheap where you've landed, that people suffer all kinds of accidents because nobody is protecting them.
Yeah.
And that is beginning to feel true here too. That, you know, oh, somebody can deploy a so-called vaccine. They can mandate it on you. You can collapse during a pickup basketball game, and it's, oh, that's a shame. Another one. These people must not have died in vain. And, you know, all of the people who took the vaccine because they thought it was the right thing to do and are now being gaslit over their non-fatal adverse events. These people all deserve an accounting of what happened, and they deserve to have what remains of our medical establishment put at their disposal to treat them.
Yeah.
It's just insane that we don't do it. So hopefully the winds will change.
I don't know what this question means. Multiple variant COVID. Multiple variant SARS-CoV-2 infections remain acute and reactivate with new infection? Question mark.
Try it again.
Multiple variant SARS-CoV-2 infections remain acute and reactivate with new infection?
You know, early in the pandemic, we talked about all of the possibilities of what it might turn out.
I think we can drop acute. Like acute doesn't need to be there, right?
Yeah.
Like remain like
Latent.
latent is the word. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we have the evidence for this. So the concern was that some
But we also
viruses-
don't know for sure it doesn't happen.
It's hard to prove it doesn't ever happen.
But I think we haven't seen solid evidence that it has happened even once.
I agree.
Yeah.
But, you know, when in the case of varicella and shingles, you know, you're talking about many decades.
That's true.
So who's to say? You know, viruses hide out, especially in neurons. Things happen, and we did talk about this possibility early on until we've seen, you know, high quality evidence that says it's happening. I think it's a remote possibility, but could be. What we have definitely seen is COVID triggering other latent viruses to reemerge.
Yeah. No, for sure. Okay, let's do a couple more and then finish up for the week, shall we?
All right.
Did the COVID vax protect against medical prejudice? Unvaxxed often did not receive care, so if you ended up at hospital, there was discrimination. That's interesting, actually. That's sort of another way that the unvaccinated numbers might not be, that the outcomes for unvaccinated people who needed to seek medical care might not be entirely what they appear because there was bias against them by medical personnel.
Well, I admit I don't totally understand the phrasing of the question here, but I will say it amplifies the point that you were making in the main podcast about that terrible paper.
Right, that's what I'm alluding to here.
Because even just at a self-selective level, at the point that people who are unvaccinated are being demonized as, you know, the cause or the repository for the virus,
Right.
the bar, how sick you have to be before you seek medical attention, that bar goes way up. And so the point is the sickest of the sick would have overcome that bar and shown up in that study. And that would, of course, bias it even more heavily.
Yeah. This does not belong here. This belonged in the main podcast, but it occurs to me that that terrible study that we were talking about which didn't compare the populations it claimed to, compared a sample from all of the vaccinated people to a sample from only those people who were not vaccinated and had COVID, and had a positive COVID test in the medical situation. They had 3 of the things that they were looking at, ER visits, hospitalizations, and deaths. They had the vaccinated, doing much better, but it wasn't a fair comparison. And yet they showed that natural immunity was better at preventing infection than vaccination was. And I made some offhand comment in the first hour about that. That still showed, even though they did this, I think it actually goes in the other direction. Let me try to explain without visuals here. If what you have done is selected for what might be the sickest of those who had COVID and were unvaccinated, those are the people probably, if basically that's going to be a subset of entirely symptomatic people. Those are the people most likely, I would expect, to actually have really strong natural immunity against future infections. Whereas the people who'd had COVID and were asymptomatic might not have such strong natural immunity going forward. That if they had actually done the study right, if they had actually compared vaccinated people, a sample from all vaccinated people, to a sample from all unvaccinated people who'd had COVID, I predict that not only would those other 3 measures, hospitalizations, ER visits, and deaths, have been reversed with regard to what we would have seen, but that the really big gap between the vaccinated and those with natural immunity might have been narrowed, because you would have had more people in the unvaccinated but have had COVID category who didn't have it bad and so might not have generated as much natural immunity. And so you would have had more future cases from that group, actually.
Yeah, there's that. It also occurs to me, and again, I didn't read the study, so
yeah.
I don't understand exactly what they did, but it also strikes me that it would be very difficult for them to establish that those in their vaccinated group did not also have COVID. Right. And therefore, they might be counting a certain amount of COVID-based natural immunity in people who happen to be vaccinated.
Oh, absolutely.
So, the number of different ways.
No, and I don't remember any indication of them trying to control for that at all. And of course, they wouldn't have been able to perfectly for exactly the same reason that they didn't, that they actually sampled from not the population they claimed to have, which is to say a lot of people, they had no access to the data for people who'd had COVID, know they had COVID, but didn't tell anyone in the healthcare system that they had COVID.
Right. And especially in light of the fact that they did not give the obvious advice, don't get vaccinated if you've already had COVID,
right,
which they should have.
No, quite the opposite.
There will be lots of people
yes.
in that cohort who had good natural immunity, and it's counting in favor of the vaccines. Isn't that diabolical? Mm-hmm. Right. Because, oh man, yeah, that's a really badly structured study.
So bad. Okay, final question for this week. Do you think animals feel pain in the same manner we do? Is it hypocritical for animal lovers to eat meat? The more closely related the animals are to us, the more like our pain they experience. Mammals experience pain in very similar ways across mammals. Probably all vertebrates experience very similar pain, as far as we know. Does that make it hypocritical for animal lovers to eat meat? No. It would be hypocritical to enjoy meat from animals that were killed with the intention of causing pain.
Or with indifference to it.
But understanding that the food that you are eating had the capacity to experience pain in life does not mean that you should not eat it.
Yeah.
And hold on, there's one more thing before you go, which is that there's just some work done by I guess I'm gonna say Temple Grandin on figuring out how best to basically feed cows into the killing chamber so that they are the least freaked out at the point that they are slaughtered. And basically, you want them not to see what's coming, and not to hear what's coming, not to smell what's coming, and not to have them know that they are being led to slaughter, because that's terrifying for anyone who has the capacity to understand such things. And yes, cows do. So we think forward, like we think ahead to, oh, that thing that I'm thinking of doing is going to cause me pain, far more than anyone else does, far more than any other animal does. Although dogs probably have some capacity for that. Some other organisms, many other primates will have some capacity for that. But reducing the expectation of pain and the actuality of pain as much as possible in the slaughtering of the animals that you intend to then use for food and sustenance is the sweet spot.
Yeah. There is a sensitivity to the idea of suffering that has become unnatural and pathological. The two questions that you're asking aren't really inherently related.
Yeah.
Right? Animals feel pain. I have no doubt that there's almost nothing remarkable to say within mammalia, right? And that's a very wide group of...
In terms of the different ways that we all feel pain.
Right. There's no reason for us to feel
a blue whale, a bat, a
differently.
giraffe, a dog, a
Pain
human.
pre-exists that group. So we've just all inherited the same system.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's an interesting question whether or not, birds, for example, which would be expected to have similar use for the information, feel it the same way. It's a very difficult question to answer.
The brains are built differently enough that I'll bet it's a little bit of different mechanism stuff, but basically similar capacity.
Yeah. But look, pain is fascinating, right? You can get injured on a battlefield and not really get in touch with your pain until you get home, right? Why is that? Oh, because it's not in your interest, right? You need to get off the damn battlefield, and feeling your own suffering when what you need to be doing is fighting your enemy in spite of your broken arm, right? No, you're going to fight your enemy, and if you have to ignore that you have a broken arm, even to the extent that you will break it worse so that it will not heal well, right? The priority is getting off the battlefield. So anyway, pain is a means to an end. It has nothing really to do with the question of whether or not it is humane to eat meat, though as soon as you get to factory farming, I believe it again becomes relevant. And I would say that factory farming is immoral because it needlessly inflicts suffering on animals that were, until factory farming, effectively our partner, right? It is a mutualism. The creatures that we eat actually have it far better evolutionarily than their wild counterparts, right? Because by traveling with us through time, they actually make it into the future, whereas their wild relatives are in danger of going extinct because of what we're doing to their habitats. So anyway, I don't think it is in an animal's interest to decide not to eat its species. However, we do a lot by hiding the way in which we raise and slaughter animals from the people who do the eating, which is in part why we have this reaction of like, oh my God, eating animals is terrible. No, raising animals in an inhumane way is terrible, and eating them...
And killing them in an inhumane way is terrible.
Right, and eating them and not thinking about what the animal that you are eating, what kind of life it led, and therefore, allowing price to drive you to hire someone to do inhumane stuff to animals that you're going to just try not to think about. That's immoral. So there's lots of moral stuff here, but it's not really about the suffering of the animal, right? Probably we should be eating a lot less meat because it wouldn't be economical if we raised them all humanely. In other words, if you're going to be an animal and you're going to live not on a feedlot, you're going to live, you're going to have some, range over which you're going to graze, then the point is, how many animals can we do that with? And so the point is, there is some interaction, but it's not the fundamental fact of eating meat. It's the way we raise meat. And the way we raise meat has been driven by economic considerations into a, frankly, indefensible and not very healthy mode.
All right. I think we did it. I think we're there.
We are there.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they're not.
They are there.
Yeah. It's different there.
Yes.
Proving Buckaroo Banzai right. Yet again. Yep.
Yet again. Yep. Buckaroo Banzai was like the Donald
Philosopher of the
Sullivan's
eighth dimension.
Yes. Indeed.
All right. We will see you next week. And until then, be good to the ones you love, eat good food, and get outside.
Be well, everyone.